Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Den Haring, my channel Fish Den 365. We're all about the art and science of fishing, especially bass fishing, but we love to fish other species too. Today's topic, we're going to talk about the night bite, specifically for topwater fishing. Recently, my son and I did a fishing trip on Lake Wallenpaupack. It was a night fishing trip. We spent 3 hours. I didn't have a whole lot of time. I'm still having some health issues that is restricting my time on the water. Hopefully that'll become resolved within the next month or so. We'll see. But we did get out and we picked a Thursday night to fish. And the reason for that is this time of year in mid-June now, more and more people are out there night fishing. And it could become a little unsafe at times during the more busier times of a week, like a Saturday night, Saturday night, maybe even a Friday night. But a Thursday is generally you have less people. But we even had some challenges on a Thursday night, and I'll explain that in a little bit. Our purpose for fishing was to go out there and see what we can catch. We were looking for stripers, and that's the other reason why we picked a Thursday. I have a spot that is perennially a good striper fishing area at night. Unfortunately, it's fairly well known, so people know about it. And so we went to our spot. We never moved off that spot. We went to it and just fished it for 3 hours. And the fish came in. There were, multi-species present. There were hybrid stripers. There were purebreds, smallmouths. My son caught a nice smallmouth. He caught a rock bass. And he also lost a good purebred, or what I think was a purebred based on how it was fighting. And I was able to catch a decent hybrid. So we did catch some fish, but overall it was slow. The bite started around 11 o'clock. We started noticing the alewives were getting more and more active. This time of year, they're still spawning, so they come up. They're in the shallows. They like to be on flats and spawning, and then the game fish will move in and feed on them. And so that's what we were keying in on this particular night. So oftentimes when you're this far into it, because this begins in May and then it goes through pretty much all of June, at least on Wallenpaupack it does, and even into July sometimes. But when you're this far into this bite, the fishing gets a little harder because what happens is the game fish begin to really key in on what the alewives are doing, and they have a very specific mating ritual where they do this little half circle or circle on the surface. Where they're rubbing each other as they do that, and the fish key on that and blow up on them. And unless you can present a bait that looks like that or resembles that, sometimes they're hard to catch. Now, other nights they'll hit with reckless abandon. You can never really predict this, so you just got to be out there on the right night, and any top water will work some nights. Other nights, you better have the right top water and the right cadence, or you're not going to get bit. It's just how it is, even though the fish are up and biting sometimes. On this particular night, there were not tons of fish up biting, but there were enough to keep our interest for sure. But by around 1 o'clock, 1:15, the alewives started to slow down, and it really got quiet. I know the fish were still in the shallows, but they just weren't blowing up on top anymore. So when you're out there this time of year, I'm going to be talking about a number of tips and some do's and don'ts. And hopefully these will help you in your fishing if you decide to go night fishing. Some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about is pretty important. But the first thing is when you're out there, if you can get out there around 10 o'clock or even 11 o'clock, you want to get onto your spot. If you have a high level of confidence that the bait fish will be there and the game fish are going to move in, whether that's walleye or striper or smallmouths, largemouths, whatever it is that you're fishing for, generally when they first start coming in to feed, they're the most vulnerable then. That's when you have your best chance of catching them. And that's when my son hooked into that bigger striper that it just pulled off. It just pulled loose. The other time is right near the end of the bite. It seems like there's a flurry where the fish are more vulnerable and you might catch them later in the night. And then of course on good nights you'll just catch them throughout the whole night. It won't matter. You'll be, those are the best times out there when that's happening. But not every night is like that. And so just in general, you want to be prepared when they're first moving in. Be ready then and be throwing your best baits and doing all the things that we're going to talk about in this video to up your odds. So what are some of the things that you want to think about when you're fishing? Number one is it's dark out, right? So, and if you have two people on the boat, that makes it even more likely for accidents to take place. So number one, you always want to be aware of where your partner is if you have another person on the boat, so that you don't accidentally hook him when you're casting. Because if you reach back to cast and your bait goes into his face or her face or whatever, you're going to have a mess. So you always want to know where your partner is, and you always want to be, teamed up in a way where you're separate enough to know what's going on and to be able to cast comfortably without having to worry about hooking somebody. The other thing that I would recommend is, this particular trip, we knew what we were going to be doing. We were going to be fishing topwaters. We were going to be fishing specific baits, only a few. We had 2 rods out on the deck, one for my son and one for me. So there were really none on the deck because they were in our hands when we were fishing. And having that clean deck is important at night. I've been out in the day where I've had 12, 14, 15 rods out on the deck. And it's different in the daytime. You can see them under your feet. You know where they are. At night, not so much. It's dark, and it's very easy to kick one right overboard and lose your outfit. And it just makes for a hazard because you can trip over them, you can get caught and tangled in your line, you can get hooked on the foot if you have a bait on them. It's best to just have those in your rod locker and pull out only what you're going to use at that time. That way you have a clear deck. When you hook a fish, you can go to the edge of the boat, use your net, flip on a light if you need to, and net that fish and get them in. So that's a definite do there. Here's a definite don't, and this happened to us on Thursday night, and we were hoping this wouldn't happen. This is why we went on a Thursday, but again, the spot we were on was a pretty good community hole. People know about it. Fortunately, we left early enough where we got into this little corner area where we liked it best, and we just hung in that corner. And I'd say about 75 yards down, there was another boat. But another 2 guys came right in between that boat and us, and they were, I could almost spit on them. And they just started throwing to the bank. We were throwing to the bank and also throwing on an angle to the bank. And it would have been nice for us to be able to go back and forth, but this guy had just cut right into where we wanted to fish and stayed there for at least 2 hours before they left, probably longer. And so that's frustrating because, they obviously didn't have confidence in any other area. They came from somewhere else and went right to that spot and interrupted us and made it more difficult for us to catch the fish that we were trying to catch. And there's just no reason for it. It's not ethical in my mind. Give people the space that they need. When they're on a spot first, you don't own the lake. It's not your spot. If someone else is on there, let them have it. Go to another spot. Maybe you'll find something even better. But to just do that and be, it's just rude. And to do that it's just annoying. And one day, if you do that enough, you're going to end up doing that to the wrong person, and you could be very sorry. So it's just a little advice. When you're out there fishing, especially at night, give people space. Don't jam them. It's just not, like I said, it's just not an ethical thing to do when it comes to fishing. Another thing you want to be aware of when you're fishing at night is lights, especially extremely bright lights, tend to scare stripers especially. And in this particular night when Anthony and I were out there fishing, my son, the fish, this was around midnight now, and the fish were hitting pretty regularly. The bait fish were up and active. There were fish blowing up on them. And across the lake on the shoreline, somebody had the brightest lantern or whatever the heck it was that you can imagine, and they flipped this thing on, and it was like a searchlight, and it lit up the entire area where we were fishing across the lake. And as soon as that light went on, the bait cane stayed up, but the stripers shut off. And and I was thinking, Jesus, they're going to leave that light on for any period of time. I'm out of here because it's just not going to be any good. But fortunately, around 10 minutes later, they shut it off and they didn't turn it back on again. And within another 10, 15 minutes, the fish were up and busting again. But bright lights definitely are a no-no when it comes to striper fishing. Now, what about your anchor light and your running lights? You got to be safe. You want to let people know that you're out there. And so, what I would recommend is, the red and green light on the bow of your boat. That's not likely going to cause much of an issue when it comes to striper fishing. It's not like a bright white light. The anchor light is a little more important. I like to have an anchor light that is visible, but that's not shining like a beacon. In other words, it's not real bright. And I also like to have an anchor light that does not shine downward, that has a base, a bottom base, so that fish looking up can't see it. It's only people looking across the lake that can see it, and that's the kind of anchor light I use because I found that it makes a big difference in not scaring fish. Once you've found the fish, and a lot of times at night that involves just going and being quiet and moving in slowly and then listening, because when these alewives are up and the bait and the stripers or whatever game fish are busting them, you're going to hear it, you're going to know. And so, you know, we all have our different baits, our favorite baits. I've got a favorite bait here. This is a Norman Top Dollar. You can see it's got a really interesting shape. It's really narrow except for the head. It's got an open head, and you can make that pop and bloop. But you can also walk the dog with this, where it will go back and forth. But this bait is very similar to the size of the alewives, to the bait fish in Lake Wallenpaupack. It's almost exact. And to me, that's important. I want to match the hatch. So this is my most confident bait when I'm fishing out there at night on Paupack. I've had great nights with this bait because it's matching not only in shape and size, but in the way I can make it work. It's matching what the bait fish are doing, and it just ups my odds to get more hits, more bites. Now, this particular night, we had to figure out how to make them hit this bait, and sometimes that can be a challenge. It got to the point where I was not getting any bites. Anthony was getting a few, and I tried a couple of different baits. I tried a Zara Spook, which is a bigger size bait. By the way, I always do a modification on my Zara Spooks with how I put my hooks on there. If you want to learn more about that, I'll put a link right above me, and you can check that link out and see what I do with my Zara Spooks. The other bait that I was using was a smaller size redfin. This is a Cordell redfin. This is a known striper bait. It works very well. You throw it out there and you reel it extremely slowly so that it stays on the surface and makes a wake. It looks like an injured bait fish. It tends to catch a lot of fish. Now, it's interesting because when I'm at Paupack, I really like this bait, but if I was fishing Lake Nakamixon, I'm more likely to throw something different, like a larger redfin. This is a bigger size redfin, like this one, just bigger. And the reason for that is, from my point of view, Nakamixon has got much bigger alewives. It's also got gizzard shad, which are bigger still. But the alewives at Nakamixon are much larger. In fact, they're about this size, lengthwise. And so I like to match the hatch that way there. But back to Paupack, you know, this thing, I used a few other baits and went right back to this because this is where my confidence was. And Anthony was experimenting with his cadence, and he noticed that if he went real slow, you know, in other words, he'd throw that bait out there, let it sit, and then he'd just pop it once, and the bait would do this. He'd wait maybe 2-3 seconds, pop it again, and the bait would come back this way. Maybe 3 seconds again, and if he did it slow like that, that's when he was getting bit. He caught a real nice smallmouth doing that. And so I began to imitate that slower cadence, and that's when I caught my hybrid. And then shortly after that, the bite shut down. But it took us a little while for us to figure out that they really wanted a slower cadence. Other nights they wanted a little faster, or sometimes they wanted quite a bit faster. Every night is a little different, and you have to just experiment out there to see what the fish want. Again, I would always say to start with your favorite lure. So we talked about cadence. There's one other factor that I think is very important, and it's the angle of your retrieve. It's the direction and the angle of how you're retrieving the bait. So most of the time when I'm out in a boat, I'm throwing towards the bank, sometimes right next to the bank because the fish are that shallow. They're in a foot of water in many cases or less. And then I'll work the bait out from the bank back out to the boat. And oftentimes that works. You know, most of the time that'll catch plenty of fish. But sometimes that angle, that you know, coming back to the boat from shallow water isn't what they want, and you have to maybe parallel the bank, maybe out in 4 or 5 feet of water, where now here's the bank, my boat's turned this way, and I'm throwing it out here parallel to the bank, and you'll find that some nights that's the only way you can get bit. And then there's other nights that you actually have to throw behind you, and so you got to get the boat pretty close to the bank, or even get out of the boat and stand on the bank if you can. I've done this already. Throw the bait out and work it back towards the bank, and sometimes that angle and direction is the key. So, you know, if you're ever out there and you're wondering why these fish aren't biting your lures, remember the cadence, remember the angle and direction. Try experimenting with those things and see if they don't up your odds in catching fish. I think you'll find that they do. Well, I hope you found this video helpful in your night topwater fishing endeavors. If you like the video, give me the thumbs up. And don't forget, if you haven't done so yet, subscribe to the channel. Hit that subscribe button, and when you do, hit that bell. That'll give you a notification for when my next video is available for you to watch. Remember, we're certified Bassified. We're all about the art and science of fishing. That's what this channel is about, and this is where you can learn some interesting concepts and ideas, and where you can fine-tune things to up your odds in catching fish. As always, may God bless your fishing endeavors.